In recent years, there's been a huge bloom of different types of video games. A lot of these games emphasizing on their own niche and trying to create this new genre. This ranges from battle royales to idle games to party games, but one specific genre that's been extremely popular is horror games.
FPS though.
Growing up, I was watching a lot of YouTube, and most of the content creators I watched mostly made horror game content. Corey Kenshin, MatPat, Markiplier, a lot of these YouTubers only played horror games, or that was kind of their whole character. It's fun to watch people play scary games when you know you can't play it yourself. As well, a lot of these games are known for their very heavy jump scares and uncanny plot points. It's no secret that horror games are something that's very popular and will remain popular for a long time. But right now, horror games aren't the same as they were in 2013. My main concern with them right now is that they're not actually scary.
Where do you think you're going?
A lot of these games kind of capitalize off of one thing, and that's lore. I mean, it seems like these days every single horror game dev just wants to be on the next Game Theory episode. I think it is very creative that these games try to come up with these very intricate story ideas, but it seems like a lot of them actually lost the plot. Yes, it is important to create this eerie atmosphere and this feeling of mystery for the player, but that only goes so far in terms of a horror game. And I feel like when I post this video, a lot of people will think I'm talking about indie games specifically, but I'm also talking about AAA games as well. I mean, look at the new Resident Evil. That game was great, but a lot of people were saying it's the least scary Resident Evil game, and a huge step down from Resident Evil 7. However, it is mostly indie games that struggle with this new issue. And I do think it is pretty obvious, but a lot of this comes from Five Nights at Freddy's. I mean, when this game came out, obviously everyone loved it. It was pretty scary, it was a very original idea, and the jump scares were extremely memorable. This game nailed atmosphere, jump scares, and storyline all into one game. But then you fast forward 7-something years and then you have all these plot points, unsolved storylines, this crazy timeline that no one understands. And now you have people who are dedicated to solving the story and trying to figure out what happened and the whole perspective of everything. Now, this might be confusing to a lot of people and kind of annoying for some people, but this is very healthy for the game. I mean, there are some people like me who don't even enjoy the newer games, but the story is still very engaging. And I think that's what a lot of people want for their horror game. They just want people to be engaged in the story, and you don't actually have to play the game. But that's the exact problem with these games. The thing with Five Nights at Freddy's was that the game was actually really fun. The first game was good, the second game was better, the third game was really hard, the fourth game was just completely scary, and they all added up to each other story-wise. But all of these newer games, they create this game that's kind of not good, but the story is very rich. Another big thing that happened with Five Nights at Freddy's and also Slenderman is that they capitalized off one character. I mean, no one plays Resident Evil because, they're fighting Nemesis. The game isn't called Nemesis, it's about the entire world of Resident Evil. However, games like Five Nights at Freddy's and Slenderman, they capitalize off the title character and the main villain. Now, there's nothing wrong with having this main character. Like, Five Nights at Freddy's having Freddy as the main character was perfect. Everyone loved it. I mean, people bought plushies and merch and all these different things because Freddy was the main character, and he didn't even matter to the story. And I feel like that's the problem with a lot of these newer indie games, is that they try to be what Freddy was. I mean, I see new horror games coming out where they release the horror game and they already have a plush and shirts out for the character, kind of just automatically assuming that everyone's going to buy that plushie, that everyone's going to be invested in this new character. Every indie game wants to be that new capital character, that new mascot. Obviously, it's different if, people want to buy these plushies and people ask for them to be made, because that's just fan service. But certain games like Hello Neighbor, they're very obviously trying to be on this YouTube content platform and create this weird fan base surrounding capitalism and just the idea of the mascot, and not actually make a good game. However, there are some very good games that came out, but also, this is where I talk about more the scary part. Amanda the Adventurer is a game that came out recently that was very popular on YouTube. It was great. I won't lie, at that time I was very tired of the mascot horror, and the idea of having another character just be the face of a horror game was just annoying to me. However, I still played the game, I still enjoyed it, and it was actually very good. There are some parts in the game that genuinely scared me, and there are some parts where I was genuinely thinking about how to beat this puzzle. The storyline in this game is very well thought out, and the chapters are really good. The actual gameplay itself is perfect. The way you interact with VHS and interact with the TV is very innovative and creative. However, all this build-up in the game leads to a final ending when you get jump scared by this creature. But when I finally got to this jump scare, it was disappointing. I mean, honestly, I did not find this thing scary at all. I don't know if it was just me, but I don't know what I'm looking at. And I think what's disappointing for me is that I play horror games because I want to be scared. I want to be immersed in the gameplay. Now, to note again, there are a lot of good examples of what's happening and also bad examples. Some of those being very, very bad examples. But one good indie game that came out recently that was extremely well done and very scary and also very good at having a plot point was The Mortuary Assistant. This game knocked my socks off. I don't even know what to say. This game is just scary. It's objectively scary. But this game is also perfect at nailing the idea of having a storyline in the background, but it's not overtaking the gameplay. Because in the end, we're not here to watch a movie. We're here to play the game. We're here to be invested in the gameplay. And this game does it perfectly. It talks about what the main character, what she's dealing with, and how the plot point of the game actually adds to what the game is about. A great balance of gameplay and storyline, and creates this basically perfect solution for a horror game. Now obviously that's an example of a more traditional horror game, first person, you have to play the story and learn about the character. There are some great horror games which are creative, like Doki Doki Literature Club, which is great, in that when you play in a dating sim and it kind of just goes south. Or Inscription, which I won't spoil it, but you're playing a card game, and that one also creates this huge digital atmosphere, and honestly it's one of the best horror games I've played, at least in terms of indie creative games. And it hurts to admit this out loud, but honestly, Poppy Playtime is one of these games that kinda does it well. Now I will say, when I first played this game, I was not impressed. I was impressed with the initial jump scare and some of the intensity in the game, but overall this game just felt like another kid's cash grab that was made to make money. And honestly, initially it was. I do know there was a lot of controversy. Something about the creators wanted to create NFTs of the game or something like that. Something really stupid. Also, the game was extremely buggy. I do know the speedrun fastest time was like 6 minutes or something like that. So you could be watching the video up to this point and be done with Poppy Playtime. Anyways, my main point is that this game was kind of bad at the first, but then it got a lot better in the later chapters. The gameplay was solid, the atmosphere was solid, the storyline was really good, but once again, the jump scares were lacking and the overall scares in the game were just lacking. But I will say that it was still very immersive and honestly just fun to play, and I feel like that's what matters. They still have a long ways to go when it comes to scaring people, but I feel like once they got the storyline mixed with the gameplay, it becomes a great opportunity for success. Another game that's been gaining traction recently is Indigo Park. Now, I won't be surprised if a lot of people don't know what this is. I've been kind of following this game for a while, so I know what it is. And honestly, I think the game that came out that was produced by the creator is not that bad. However, I really wanted to bring this up because I feel like it ties into everything else I was saying. This game is very reminiscent of Poppy Playtime and Five Nights at Freddy's in the way that the game kind of doesn't tell you anything and gives you these small little hints to try to figure out the lore. And I'm gonna be 100% real, I'm tired of it. I'm really tired of it. There have been so many different games that came out that just throw these little plot points and clues at the player to make them guess about what's happening in the story. At first it was a very smart way at storytelling to make the player guess, but it's not fun when every single horror game does it. Looking at traditional games like Resident Evil, where if you play as Leon, you're finding out things about the story as the player. There's no mascot character to yell at you in your ear telling you, oh, here's what you should expect, here's what you should worry about. In the game Indigo Park, I feel like does exactly what I'm talking about. The main character kind of gives you these weird story clues about what the character doesn't like, and kind of this mysterious persona, oh, I don't feel a certain way about this weird character. It just feels kind of annoying when the game just pushes this extremely vague story point into your face. They did this a lot in Poppy Playtime, and I found that actually pretty annoying when they kept talking about the hour of play. Now, once they mentioned it for the first time, it was kind of like, oh, I wonder what that is. But then they kept talking about it over and over and over again until you finally found out about it. But once you get to the point in the game where you find out about it, you kind of don't care anymore because all the characters have been hyping it up for no reason. And honestly, that works for some people. A lot of people will hear something about the game or something in the story and they'll think, oh, I need to keep playing so I can find out about what this means. But that's only going to work a certain amount of times. I feel like it's important to get to a point where the player asks their own questions and finds story points on their own. This creates this more mysterious and unsettling environment. That way the player can be way more immersed in the gameplay, storyline, and horror atmosphere. Going back to Indigo Park, I feel like the main problem that I had with this game is that it just wasn't scary. The atmosphere was great. I loved the characters, even though it low-key reminded me of every single game that came out in like the last 5 years. But once I interacted with the first horror or like chase part of the game, I was kind of disappointed. And I'm not going to sit here and pick on this game because I know it's new. I know the first chapter came out and honestly not fair, but I think it just really sparked this idea in me where creators don't understand the main part of a horror game is that it's scary, that it's horror. I feel like it's important to note that there's a reason why in movies that there's a horror category and a thriller category. When it comes to film, thriller movies aren't as scary as horror movies, but they are very tense and it does get the audience on the edge of their seat, but it's not exactly something that you'll stay up having nightmares about. There are some video games that do label themselves as thriller, but that doesn't really sell when it comes to consumerism. I do think that video games could greatly benefit from a thriller category instead of a horror category. That way also players can know what's too scary for them and then what's tolerable. Because I think for people like me, when I see horror game, I expect something to actually be very scary, but a lot of these games aren't really that scary, but they're more just, well, thrillers. And if I played a game going into it knowing that it was a thriller and not something that's gonna genuinely scare me, I would probably be way less harsh on it. But I do think for now, if you do label your game as a horror game and you do advertise it as being scary, I think it's fair to expect something that's genuinely scary. And I do think it is fair to also expect for the creator to spend a lot of time on scaring the player. Because world building and atmosphere will only get you so far. There are great games that just capitalize on atmosphere, like Little Nightmares is a great game that's just atmospheric horror, but it's also just great. Limbo and Inside are also two games that don't really have any jump scares, but those games scared me. But at the same time, I could also just label those games as thriller because they're not actually scary, they're just more thrilling. I do wish to see more creative horror games and more creative ways to scare the player in the future. As well, I do think that a lot of these games that I mentioned are still worth playing. A lot of these are great games. I just love to rant. Oh, and also,
Where's everyone going? Bingo?